So our beginning in silence is a way that we affirm our identity of who we are and where we live and our intention. As I said last week, intention is another fancy word for spiritual practice. So if it helps you to close your eyes, you can do that. May grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in our mouths and in our speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our end and at our departing. And may, because of what we do here, we grow in patience and tolerance, kindness and love. Amen. That didn't pick that up. So I want to say something to those of you who are watching online and to those of you who are here. I sometimes tease and get a little smart-alecky about people who watch online and say, call you pajama people and say if you live within a 25-mile radius, you ought to be here, which is true. But what I do want to make clear to everybody, and I'm doing this because I've gotten such an increase in email lately, and forgive me for not responding to all of it, I can't keep up. What I want to say to you and to those of you who are gathered here, I am so grateful that we have a place like this where this kind of teaching can occur. And I want to just be clear that no matter whether you are white, brown, black, or green, it ain't easy being green, as Kermit said. No matter where you are in your spiritual journey, whether you've been at the spiritual religious stuff for decades, or whether you're just in the wading end of the pool, no matter who you are or no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. I'm grateful for you. Pajama people. I love this painting by Terry Thompson, and I thank Terry for giving us permission to use it. Pretty soon I'm going to take his name off of it, so you'll think maybe I did it. So, and you got your community newsletter. If you did not, sign up at the table back. I want to make two brief announcements. First, about next week. Next week, a newly found friend of mine, Malcolm Scott, is going to be here speaking, and then he and I are going to dialogue. Malcolm Scott lives in Houston, but his story was featured on Dateline. So if you go on Dateline and search for A Long Road to Freedom, you will find Malcolm Scott's story. I will try to put a link to that in the summary that goes out about today and also in the preview. He is an amazing human being. And you will not want to miss next Sunday. And we're lucky that he will be here. So that, we have a slide about that. The next thing we don't have a slide about, but I'm going to break the news to you today. And it will be going live on Tuesday. You know what I'm going to say?
Me anxious.
That on March the 22nd, Nadia Bose-Weber is going to be with us here in this space.
Yeah.
So there will be a Saturday evening event with Nadia here. At least we're thinking about it being here, or some suggestion about it being in the sanctuary because of crowd size. There will be a registration. There will be a charge for the Saturday evening event. Then on Sunday, she will be giving the sermons at both 8:30 and 11:30, and then during Ordinary Life, she will be dialoguing here with me. So that's on March the 22nd. And if you don't know who Nadia Bose-Weber is, she is the tattooed Lutheran lady. That's a way to describe her, right?
Yes. It is one way to describe her. Yeah.
Okay. She's amazing. I quoted her prayer that she put online the Wednesday after the election in here. And Dr. Jeff McDonald quoted it in staff meeting. So, go. Okay, here we go.
Maybe it's the Band-Aid.
I think it's my band-aided finger that's doing it. So, the teaching theme of these teachings is the wayless way, and that teaching got suggested by two sentences from the work of theologian Sarah Grant, who said it is not the way because Jesus walked it, rather Jesus walked it because it's the way. And calling it the wayless way is something that comes directly from the works of Meister Eckhart. Holly's going to be referencing Meister Eckhart before we're done today. So we've been drawing teachings from the most current biblical research that we have about the Jesus narrative. And so far, we have been drawing those from the birth stories that we have. And these birth parables in Mark, in Luke and Matthew that we have, we're calling overtures, because that's what Marcus Borg called them, and because an overture contains everything that is to follow in the main performance. So that if you understand what is in the parables about the birth of Jesus, you will understand the story. So today we're basing the teaching that we're offering, which we are calling God's Dangerous Dream, on a hymn that is found in the first part of the Gospel according to Luke. Now, there's something interesting about this teaching that you're going to hear today. And I don't think it's something that we talked about why during all the time that we talked this week. But during the decades that I have been doing preaching or teaching on biblical stuff, I have never given a sermon or given a teaching based on this text, ever. Which is kind of amazing because the hymn that we're going to look at today is sung in most liturgical churches either every day or every week. So there's a paradox in that. Verses that are used in some cases on a daily basis in Christian worship, I have never taught on until today. And as we get into it, I think you might be able to figure out why. Because in these verses, Mary, the mother of Jesus, does not come across as the meek, humble, hanging back on the margins female that we have become used to. Rather, she is more like Mother Jones or Rosie the Riveter. Rosa Parks. Absolutely. Hadn't thought about that.
Maybe you're just really getting in touch with your feminine side as you get older, yeah? I love it. I told Bill I did my best to wear Virgin Mary blue today, but I don't think they let non-virgins wear Virgin Mary blue. So here we are. You wore blue too.
I am wearing Virgin Mary blue.
Okay, good. So what we're doing today is speaking to this universal and timeless mandate to treat each other the way we want to be treated, with dignity, with compassion and love. This is God's dangerous dream for us, that we might dare to actually love one another and then birth God into the world. So to your point that Mary is neither meek nor mild, this artist, a Native American artist, Ben Wildflower, depicts Mary in this line of cut as a kind of fighter or warrior. She's not the haloed, mild virgin here. She's got her fist up in the air. She's fierce. She has one foot on the serpent, the other on a skull. In the Magnificat, we are given this chance to reimagine Mary's role as a new kind of feminine. And she's unmarred here by the burdens of original sin, which so many generations of women have inherited. The shame of being female. The power of this image is in its starkness. So a lot of times when you're mass producing an image that you want to get out into the public, artists use printmaking because it's a way to get a powerful image out in a very contrasty way. So he has dozens of these prints as almost like pamphlets to pass out. This is also who the Virgin Mary is. And he's upholding a long tradition of artists who make graphic prints for the cause of liberation. And some of the words of the Magnificat are wound around her. And her concern here is for the world, and it's rooted in radical love. She's here to say we're not bad, flawed sinners who can't help what we do and need external grace from God. The power of Mary is that the grace we seek is within us. It is born inside of us. I love these two Marys side by side. But we are going to talk about the Magnificat as a protest song, kind of a chin thrust to the establishment, if you will. And it's based on ancient ideas.
So, as you know, I love to contribute to religious literacy.
I had this thought, like, you're the play-by-play person, and I'm the color commentator.
Yeah?
Yeah, like, you give all the facts of, like, what's happening in the game, and I'm like, yeah, that's what we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're about to
Yeah.
switch to the other team. So unless you take the position that God one day tapped a guy named Luke on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Luke, get some paper and a pen. I want you to write this down." You have to struggle with the idea of how come we have the text we have in the scriptures in the first place? Where did they come from? And I think that the minute you do that, you get involved in what is commonly known now as deconstruction. The minute you ask a question about how, why, what about anything religious or theological, the process of deconstruction begins. Now, what we have in the Christian scriptures, the origin of some of it is really fairly easy to determine because they are letters that were written by one person to a group of people. There are a number of them in the Christian collection. About 7 of them are actually authentically to be attributed to Paul. So what happened is that, this is what we think would happen. What happened is that after the death and the experience of resurrection, stories began to circulate about Jesus. There were first stories about what he did, because it seems, according to the scholarship, that in order for Jesus to attract crowds to speak to, he had to do things that got attention. So it is well established that there were healers at the time. Jesus was a healer. He healed people. Crowds came to go gaga over that, and that gave him the opportunity to teach. And over a period of time, these stories were put into something of a logical order that would lead from the birth of Jesus to the execution and resurrection experience. The first of these that we have in the Christian collection is Mark. In Mark, you don't have a birth story, and actually you don't have a resurrection story. Those stories were added later. So Mark is the bare bones of this is what the Jesus story was all about. So it begins with John the Baptist, and it goes to the execution and then the resurrection. These stories would be told around a common table when Jesus' followers would gather to recall memories and to elaborate on those memories. And that's how this oral tradition came alive and was kept alive among these people. So Mark put together a version. Then Luke took that version, whoever wrote Luke, and elaborated on it. Luke's about twice as long as Mark. And Luke appended to the story a birth parable. Now these are parables, just like Jesus told parables. And in the birth story that Luke wrote about Jesus, he has Mary sing a hymn. The hymn that Mary sings actually comes from the Hebrew scripture. So it was written about 1,000 years before Jesus. It also has some psalm and some from the prophet Habakkuk in it. But it's the song in Samuel where another woman is given a divinely created birth of Samuel. And so Mary sings this song. So you get the picture. Mary is 15, 16 years old. She gets pregnant. She goes to her cousin, Elizabeth, who is also, though married, Mary is not married, Elizabeth is also pregnant with another divinely intervened pregnancy taking place. And when Elizabeth sees Mary, she breaks out in the first line of the line that's used by anybody who knows how to pray the rosary. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. That's in the rosary. And then whereupon Mary breaks into song. And she sings this song that she got. Now the point I'm trying to make is that what you're hearing, what you're about to hear in the recitation of this hymn, is something that the biblical scholars call pre-gospel. That is, this hymn was sung by Jesus' followers before there was any written text about any of the Gospels. They would be singing this hymn long before Jesus came on the scene, because it was a song of Jewish aspiration for when the Jews would be vindicated and lifted up, and Jerusalem would be restored into all its glory. So when Jesus came, taught, died, they experienced resurrection, they still were singing his hymn, but it had new meaning. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So it was not something that Mary just walked up to Elizabeth and broke into song and sang. It was something that was created in this process. So they didn't cut and paste from Old Testament text into this and create this hymn. It was their belief that this hymn contained the essence of what they saw and heard in Jesus. Now, we had thought about playing the Magnificat. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, if you go on YouTube and you look for the Magnificat, you can see and hear St. Paul's Church sing the Magnificat in the cathedral in Truro, England, when they were doing the Magnificat every day in evensong. It's beautiful. And they do a different setting every service. So, as beautiful as it is, it can distract from just hearing the words. So, we just want to read it to you. And just keep in mind that for the followers of Jesus, these words were the gospel. Mm-hmm. Gospel means good news. Yeah. Okay. So that's it.
Diane Schenke sent me several recordings of the Magnificat over the last couple of weeks, all of which were pretty stunning. And we thought about playing just a few minutes of it, but I think at some point this week I just said, what do you think about just reading it? We've heard it adorned. We've heard it draped in like really beautiful chords and high church music. But how often do we just read it in kind of naked, plain voice? So here we go. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Will it help me get in touch with my feminine?
It will.
Okay.
Yeah. You start.
My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name.
His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts.
He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty.
He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever. Someone asked if we were going to sing it.
No, but the reason that I've never taught about it is that we're about to get in somebody's kitchen.
That's what I love to say. Yeah. I don't know the origin of that phrase, but I love it. This man, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he is a theological hero of mine. He resisted the Nazis as they rose to power. And I mentioned a couple weeks ago that he advocated for what he called a religionless Christianity. So how do we bring the tenets of Christianity into the world without this belief system that sometimes traps it? And he writes, "The Song of Mary is the oldest Advent hymn. It is also the most passionate, the wildest, and one might almost say the most revolutionary Advent hymn that has ever been sung. This is not the gentle, tender, dreamy Mary as we often see her portrayed in paintings. The Mary who is speaking here is passionate, carried away, proud, enthusiastic. There is none of the sweet, wistful, or even playful tone of our Christmas carols, but instead a hard, strong, relentless hymn about the toppling of thrones and the humiliation of the lords of this world, about the power of God and the powerlessness of humankind. Here, God is not ashamed of human loneliness, but goes right into the middle of it, chooses someone as an instrument and performs miracles right there where they are least expected. God draws near to the lowly, loving the lost, the unnoticed, the unremarkable, the excluded, the powerless, and the broken." This was a sermon of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's just before he was captured and killed by the Nazis for speaking out against the Nazis. He ultimately paid for his life for words like these. People who speak truth to power pay consequences. I don't want to pretend that this is easy. Even Bill and I have varying levels of privilege when it comes to which of us is more protected should we choose to speak up about certain things. And speaking out shakes the establishment. But we speak, and it challenges our sense of comfort. I think anytime you find yourself in a position of saying something ain't right or that doesn't sound right, your heart's racing. It can feel scary. But we speak truth to power when suppression is no longer an option. It's an allegiance to a much bigger thing than the self, and it does threaten our belonging. I have felt this in many painful ways and in communities I love. But it's difficult for me, I'm also a counterphobic 6 on the Enneagram, to repress this compulsion to speak when I feel that I must, when what I have to say comes from somewhere other than just myself. I'm not trying at all to sound grandiose here, but what I'm drawing attention to is that little voice in us that does know when something ain't right. And so I thought about what questions should we ask ourselves in order to take the next right step in God's dangerous dream. And the first one I thought was, is this coming from a place of defensiveness, reactivity, or righteousness, or from a place that aligns with deeply held values? And second, am I speaking for more than just myself? Am I maybe speaking up for the well-being of others who are not in this room or don't have the privilege of speaking up themselves? In what ways can I use the privilege I have for good? And we all have privileged parts of us and subjugated parts of us. And in different circumstances, my privilege may show up and my subjugation might show up. So when you find yourself in a situation where your privilege is up, can you use your privilege for good? Can what I have to say be heard in the space where I stand, or will it be dismissed, waved away, or outright rejected? If I can't speak where I stand, do I need to consider joining a space where I belong? My husband is a much more measured person than I am. And he always says, Holly, you've got to learn to pick your battles. And I think sometimes we do have to know what is our audience capable of hearing. Will it fall on deaf ears, or will it be heard and maybe wrestled with a little bit? And then who is at risk if I choose to speak up or if I choose to remain silent? Many of you by now have likely seen this woman, the Reverend Marian Edgar Buddy. Yeah. She is the one who gave the inauguration sermon, and without berating, without condemning, without being unkind, she made a plea for the Trump team to have mercy, to show compassion and lift up what Mary's prayer calls the lowly. In this case, immigrants, documented and non-documented alike, and specifically the LGBTQIA community, especially trans folks, who are facing major fears right now. She was asked later, or rather, it was demanded of her to give an apology. I just thought, how did love get to be such an outlandish idea? And why should we apologize for trying to uphold it? Her comment to that was, I am not going to apologize for having mercy for others. This is on all of us. It's about the kind of country we were called to be. And she says, that's what I did my best to try and speak to present an alternative to the culture of contempt. And to say that we can bring multiple perspectives into a common space and do so with dignity and respect. We need that because this culture of contempt is destroying us. I believe her words are a modern-day Magnificat. If we're honest with ourselves, Mary is exactly the kind of person who we would scorn today, a pregnant, poor teenager. She's the kind of girl who gets kicked out of schools. I've worked in schools where pregnant girls got kicked out. Nothing happened to the guy. Or they get hidden away by families until their condition is taken care of. This is how it usually goes. But Mary has a really different idea for us. Her song and Marianne Buddy's words are acts of resistance that represent a much bigger idea than just themselves. They are words for all ages, for all times, whose shape changes as needed. In both, they're pleading for a reversal of the world order, for a return to the completion of the ideas of Jesus and others who wanted to bring forth this kind of beloved community. It's echoed in so many other traditions that extend far beyond the beginning of Christianity. And this chart is just some of the traditions that have a foundation of reciprocity. Treat others as you want to be treated. The earliest known mention of this kind of golden rule, that we ought to love one another, is from ancient Egypt in 2000 BC. And includes this proverb. I love this. It's hard to say. Do to the doer to make him do. And this from the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the oldest spiritual texts. Keeping yourself as the yardstick, seeing others as equal to you, consider what is pleasurable and painful.
So I want to give a huge shout out to Brian Powers. I don't see him here today. But a few weeks ago, when I was talking about doing teachings from these birth parables, I mentioned that we were going to get to this hymn of Mary. And he came up to me after class and he said, did you know that this passage was taken out of Bibles that was given to slaves? And I said, no, I don't think I knew that. So later, he sent me links to the history behind this. And this is a copy, what you're seeing right here. I think it says parts of Scripture. This is in Fisk University's library right now as a historical object. This Bible was put together, crafted, and published to teach a pro-slavery version of Christianity to enslaved people. Over 90% of the Hebrew Scripture was taken out. Over 50% of the New Testament was taken out. All the references to freedom, escape from slavery, and the such were removed. Passages encouraging obedience and submission were emphasized. And this Bible was first published in England and was used by British missionaries to convert people in the West Indies to Christianity and to educate them into the ways of Christ. So they took out of the New Testament what some people say, some scholars say, was actually maybe the first creedal statement of the church before Constantine got a hold of it. And that creedal statement says, in Christ's family, there can be no division into Jew and non-Jew, slave and free, male and female. Among us, you are all equal. They took that out. And they took this text out that we're looking at today. Why would they do that? Because the hope articulated by Jesus for what he called God's will was about a community where everybody had a place at the table. 2 weeks from now, when we come back, I'm going to talk about that table, about what Jesus meant by that community, and about how tricky it is for somebody to say to somebody else, you need to assimilate. That's a power position, meaning you need to be like me, rather than how can we create something. Now, we don't publish a Bible like this today, except by the way that we use it. Yeah. Christian nationalists pick and choose what fits their agenda. I suppose I could be accused of doing the same thing. I want, insofar as possible, to consistently work through the narrative of Jesus, not omitting things that are unpleasant like this, because this hymn of Mary speaks to me. I'm not of the lowly, nor is almost anybody who's listening to this. We're the ones this hymn is directed at, which is part of the reason I've neglected teaching from it for so long. One of the hottest political issues right now is being pro-choice. That means abortion. It's a complicated topic, but I think that being pro-life was pretty high on the agenda of Jesus. I think you could say that. So if one is driven to a pro-life position out of the conviction that all of us are created in the image of God, why doesn't that extend to refugees? Or the separation of children from their mothers? Or programs to feed hungry children? Or the lifelong incarceration of nonviolent offenders? Or wrongfully execution of the innocent? Or executions at all? Or what about a healthcare system that prices out sick people and produces the developed world's largest, highest maternal mortality rate, or the facts that guns are the #1 cause of death for children in the United States? There's a well-known figure whose name I will not mention, but she was running for governor of Arkansas. And she said, we will make sure that when a kid is in the womb, they are as safe as they are in a classroom. And she did not get the irony of that. That it's just like a church that says, we practice radical hospitality, but the subtext is if you're gay, lesbian, or other, you can't serve here. Mm-hmm. For many people in our culture, politics has become a substitute for religion. Everything that Jesus taught about the love of God and of neighbor is in this text that we're looking at today. And this text, not politics, is the recipe for effective change.
I want to reiterate how just nutty it is to me that love has become political. How we love, who we love, whether we love. I mean, that to me just, it blows my mind. And as you were talking, I was thinking about Shane Claiborne, who's an evangelical guy who kind of started this community of almost monastic living and very egalitarian living. And I probably disagree with him theologically, but one thing he says is, if you are going to be pro-life, it cannot just be about these 9 to 10 months in the womb. It has to be about the entire life of a person, of a child, of a woman, of a poor mother. That it is not about getting a baby born. It's about seeing someone to live to their fullest potential. And that's where we fail. Is what does it mean to create the circumstances that allow people to live to their fullest potential? And this is it's weighing on me a lot lately. I think just in this climate. Yeah.
By the way, Sherry and I saw Shane Claiborne at a Richard Rohr event. He's written a book called Jesus for President.
Yeah.
And he lives in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And they take guns, he and his monastic group, and they take these guns and melt them down and make farming tools.
Yeah, I've seen that. It's pretty
biblical.
Incredible. Yeah, reshape them.
Swords into plowshares.
Yeah. So this message of lifting up the lowly, of filling the hungry, of loving others as we would want to be loved, is ancient and universal. In the Christian tradition, I love that Mary, this poor girl, is the vessel for this message. She's not at all an arbitrary part of it, just an instrument, but an essential part of it, the literal birther of this kind of love into the world. We all of us, and Bill just said it, who are gathered here are easily part of the sort of established or institutionalized church. We're not part of a radical community it's just the way church has become. It's not our fault. It just is what it is. Church became status quo, and it's gotten so far away from the intent of this revolutionary prayer. I imagine a lot of us have varying levels of feelings about the rounding up of immigrants in our country. I also just kind of go, aren't all of us at some point, besides Native Americans, immigrants to this country? At one point or another, we came hoping for something. And now we're appointing ourselves, and by that I really mean white people, are appointing ourselves the directors of who gets to stay. So these images, this reeks of the treatment of Native Americans when colonizers pushed them along the Trail of Tears into regions around Oklahoma and Kansas. And they were pushed in the same way. Many of them died along the way. These are immigrants in chains from a couple of weeks ago. Most of the people who have come to this country are not criminals. So they're being transported. Guantanamo Bay is being prepared for these people. It was supposed to be closed at the end of this last administration because of its conditions. They'd gotten down to 13 people there, and the plan is to close it, and now they're reopening it to put immigrants. Schools are being staked out right here in this city. A person dear to me who herself was undocumented until about 4 years ago texted me. She works at a school. They have been in our neighborhood all week at the Walmart, the gas stations, and pulling large groups over on the freeway all at once. An immigration advocacy organization, you know what I'm talking about, John Howard, that I am involved with, had a surprise visit from an immigration officer last Thursday just to quiz them on their knowledge of immigration policy. They help undocumented folks become legal. It's chaotic and it's fear-inducing, but these are the lowly. These are the strangers. These are the ones that Mary is calling us to raise up in honor, in whose faces we are called to see God. We've managed, in the relatively short history of the United States, the modern United States of America, to continually other others, to castigate whomever we feel is a threat to the status quo. This has included women. It's included Native Americans, immigrants from various places, Muslims, enslaved people, the LGBTQIA community. At one point, it even included those from this very state who suffered during the Dust Bowl and went west looking for jobs. So Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, all these states were deeply affected by the Dust Bowl. And as they went west, they were forced into encampments. They were called Okies collectively, and that was an insult. And the West Coasters thought that they were addled with disease, and they kept them in these encampments so that what happened? They got sick. And many of them died because they had not clean water. They didn't have toilets. This happens even regionally among, how many of us have been in Texas for a long time who probably have ancestors who might have been affected by the Dust Bowl. But they were scorned and feared because they were poor, and they were treated as other. Mary knew this feeling, what it was like to be othered. And I wonder, what do we owe the modern day Marys? What's our song to sing? I don't know when compassion and mercy became partisan, when it began to belong to the radical left. That's not what we're trying to say here. We're trying to say compassion and mercy is not partisan. It's our greatest capacity as a human to show mercy, love, and compassion. And these are the values that represent the very best of us.
So when you and I are in conversation about things like this during the week, then my experience is, oh my God, there's so much more to learn here.
Yeah.
And I thought I knew this stuff.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean, seriously. I in part of my practice this morning, I read something written a few years ago by Diana Butler Bass, and it was like I was seeing something new for the very first time. And there's just so much to extract from the tradition, and it's not that the tradition changes. Yeah. We change.
We change.
Our circumstances change. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there is a line in this birth parable in Luke that says, when the angel comes to Mary and announces all this, and she's going to get pregnant and everything, and Mary pondered these things in her heart. And that's what we are inviting us to do today, to ponder these things. Both the things we think are good and those we think are bad, because it takes a while to figure out what's what. Some of the things that we label tragic turn out to be the best. And some that we think are awful turn out to be the place where we learn our most important lessons. One of the things Mary models for us is how to be present. How to be present to the moment, how to be present to ourselves, to each other, to get beyond so that we can be serious about sacred mystery and what we're calling God's dangerous dream. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing about spiritual teaching. It's true for me, and I just project it onto you. I love to go hear people who agree with me. So what Mary's hymn invites us to do, indeed the entirety of Jesus' message, is not to ask whether this truth matches up with our truth, but rather, does our truth match up to this dream? So I want to share with you a bit of synchronicity. This past Wednesday, I attended the Eucharist service that was here at St. Paul's. We have the Eucharist service every Wednesday here. And Natalie Negretti, our clergy on staff, who oversees the Fe y Esperanza community. In English, that means faith and hope. Natalie, who is from Bolivia, looks Hispanic as can be, she gave the homily. And the homily that Natalie gave was for the common good. So after that Eucharist, about once every 6 or 8 weeks, all the clergy here gather for lunch. And so we went up to the tower room and had lunch, and after the pleasantries were exchanged around the table, the intense topic of conversation turned to the fear that people in the Hispanic demographic of this church have about what is going on and about how we can support them. And what will we do if ICE shows up here? Because we run a Hispanic program every day in this building. And I learned during that conversation that some of the people who work for St. Paul's, who are Hispanic, who look Hispanic, who have been here for years, are now carrying their passports on their person every day because they're so frightened. White people don't have to do that. What struck me is at the end of the Eucharist service, the closing hymn was this. It's a hymn called "Tell Out My Soul." This is synchronicity, because this hymn was written in 1919 by an Anglican priest after he had read Mary's hymn in the New English Bible translation. And right above it in the hymnal is printed the text that we are using today. And I went home that night, and after the impact of the homily that Natalie gave, she's a really good preacher. And being struck by the fact that Holly and I had been talking every day about this text, that the text was virtually sung in that service, I turned on the TV after dinner, and there was a program commemorating the Holocaust. And I went to bed thinking about how right now, it's been true before in this culture, but right now we live in a culture where black and brown people are frightened about what's next. And about where for some of our political leaders it seems to be okay to give what looks like a Nazi salute at a political gathering. And I thought about this text and about how it isn't something for us to read or to read about, but somehow to become. Through Mary and people like her, poor, lowly, culturally insignificant folks, God is doing great things. That's the faith. But we have so idealized and so Christianized both Jesus and Mary that we frequently fail to get it, that the spiritual and political significance of Mary is not what God did for her, but that through her and you and me, God dreams great things for those who are marginalized and forgotten and scared and poor. Their faith was and is an ancient Jewish belief that God will bring down the mighty and exalt the lowly. That's why I never taught about this, because we don't like to hear that. But it's God's dangerous dream. The Magnificat speaks of a dream of a human community. It goes all the way back 1,000 years before Jesus. where people on the margins have instinctively identified with this hymn and the dream, and they have prayed for the liberation for their suffering and taken hope from this.
Yeah. So good. The other night I watched the movie Lee. Yeah, on Hulu, I think, if you have it. It's a dramatic biography of Lee Miller's life. She was a lingerie model who turned photographer for Vogue, who turned war correspondent, played by Kate Winslet, and war correspondent during World War II. And I was struck by a line in the movie when members of the kind of French resistance, a lot of artists and poets and writers, are just beginning to realize how bad it's getting. And one of them says, it's not just the Jews they're after. It's artists, communists, homosexuals, black people, gypsies, anyone with an opinion. Anyone who resists, they're just disappearing. So I'm reminded that there have been harder times than this. And I'm reminded that there have always been brave people who documented and resisted and sang where mercy and compassion lacked. Many of Lee Miller's images were withheld from publication during the time that she took them because they rattled the delusion that things weren't as bad as they seemed. They were bad. But we oughtn't ignore her images today. She gifted us with them so that we might not make the mistake of repeating them. And art, and this is particularly true in the world that I live in, art has a particular place of power in times like this. And again, like to use the privilege and the skill that you have to say what you know to be true. Like Lee Miller, Mary was so brave. One commentary I read compared Mary to this icon. She was not part of dominant culture. I love the similarities in these two poses with the stars gathered around her. But she's not part of the dominant culture that her name has become associated with. She's synonymous with Christianity, but she was not part of the dominant religion. Somehow this movement of outcasts became a movement of oppression. It became the status quo, to the degree that Mary's song has been outright banned in India, Guatemala, and Argentina still today. I looked up in how many countries is the Magnificat banned, and it's banned outright in 3 countries today. Yeah, from what I read. Please prove me wrong. The reaction to Reverend Buddy's message reminds us how controversial these words still are. Have mercy. Show compassion, lift up the lowly, fill the hungry with good things, and protect the stranger. Are these not the very tenets of the faith we profess to believe in? I have a feeling we'll be called upon to be brave and merciful and kind in the coming days and years, and I hope we'll abide in whatever way we can. More than a spiritual revolution, Mary's Magnificat is also a mystical experience. She's pregnant with God. If we are to consider this question in lieu of our title, God's Dangerous Dream, we too are being asked to become impregnated with God. Jesus is not a one-time event, but as I said earlier, part of a timeless and universal movement whose core principles are foundational to this dangerous dream. What might actually happen if we loved one another? Just because. We just might learn that we are so much more than we ever thought possible. And to close with Meister Eckhart's words, what good is it to me that Mary gave birth to the Son of God 2,000 years ago if I do not also give birth to the Son of God in my own time and in my own culture? We are all meant to be mothers of God. God is always needing to be reborn.
No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo. And if you want to see a modern enactment of what we have talked about today, come next Sunday and hear Malcolm Scott. See you next week.